Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. My name is Freda Walker, and we are getting ready to start our webinar. And I just would like to go over a few of housekeeping items with you. This webinar, we have a variety of items where you can respond, and you can see that your PowerPoint is over on the left. And we would like to encourage you to chat in the chat function that is in the center of the, oh hi Esperanza, anyway, in the chat. And if those of you that have been listening, if you're from another organization, if you could list that in the chat, I would appreciate it. Also, you're going to see that there are some documents that you can download. One is the handout. One is the handout that we have so that you can have all the information from the webinar today. And if you will download that, then you'll have that. It gives you information about our presenters. It also gives you links and goes over some of the content that you will have in the webinar today. Also, you can see that there is a NAEP Services handout. If you'd like to download that, I would appreciate it, so that you know that the toolkits and the professional development that NAEP provides is available to you through the information on that handout. Let's see, I think that that's about where we are. I just want to check one or two things. Okay, here we go. I'd like to start by moving us into the present mode, which means that, well, yes, I think I'm ready to present. And I would like to just say that Greg Nagy, who is our webinar tech, is having some issues, and so even though he helps us every time at the webinars, he is trying to get back online, and I just, that's his normal job to do the introduction. But my name is Freda Walker, and I work for NAEP and host the webinars. I'd like to introduce, or just tell you a little bit about the funding. We're funded through NAEP, the National Alliance for Partnerships and Equity, and we also are funded by the National Science Foundation. We have a grant, and it's provided a lot of opportunity for us to get the word out about a lot of research. I'd like to encourage you to look at any of our the webinars that we've done in the past. They're archived at naepequity.org. Also, at the end of this webinar, you can receive a certificate of completion. When you complete the survey to find out how you liked our webinar, then you can download that, fill in your name, and have it as a certification if you need that for your work. Also, I've already told you about the resource documents, and please download them now so you'll have them. We will do a question and answer after the presentation, and so I would encourage you, though, if you have questions, to put them in the chat function, and that way they can be recorded so the presenters can answer them. I'm going to start by introducing Megan Pollock. She is our Director of Professional Development at NAEP. Welcome, Megan.
Thanks, and good afternoon, everyone. So today we have an exciting treat for all of you. We're going to introduce our new curriculum, Realizing Potential with Mindset. And today we're going to focus specifically on action steps for educators and counselors. And if you are in a role that is outside being a specific type of educator or counselor, you're still going to learn something great today. So our instructors for today are Michelle Brown and Monique Cola. Dr. Monique Cola is in Louisiana, and she works for the Delgado Community College, and she's assistant to the Vice Chancellor of Student Affairs, and she also has a PhD in neuroscience, and so she brings to the table some discussions around how our brain grows. Michelle Brown is going to be leading the session today. Michelle is a curriculum projects manager for us at NAEP, and she's the lead author for this work that you're going to be learning today. And so Michelle brings to us a skill set of being a middle and high school science teacher at a couple of places across the country, and so I'm excited to have her bring her expertise to you all today. And just as a reminder, if you don't have a toolkit yet, you can order that at napequity.org. And we'll tell you a little bit more about the nuts and bolts of the toolkit at the end of the session. And now I'm going to turn it over to Michelle and Monique. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Megan. We are very excited to be here today to talk to you about mindset. And like Megan said, this work is so helpful for educators, whether it's K-12, community college, or beyond, but it can apply to so many different areas that I really think everyone's going to get something out of this today. Like Megan said, I have a background in education. I come to this work having worked as a 6th through 9th grade science teacher, so that's the lens I bring to this work, and I hope that helps you connect this work to your field in education.
Hi everyone, I'm Monique Cola, as Megan just said, and as Michelle mentioned as well. But I come to you from Delgado Community College, where I'm the Assistant Vice Chancellor of Student Affairs, and I'm a little nervous because this is my first webinar. But nonetheless, my background is in neuroscience. I spent 20 plus years at Tulane University here in New Orleans doing neuroscience research. I ran an independent research program in Alzheimer's disease and in stroke research. So I am really excited about being able to use some of those skill sets in this equity work dealing with brain plasticity.
Great.
So, first of all, what our goal is today is to help you to be able to identify behaviors associated with fixed and growth mindsets. And we'll explain a little bit more about what a fixed and a growth mindset is, but one of our main objectives is for you to leave here better understanding what those two concepts are. The benefit of that is that a growth mindset is good for all students because it helps them to get through what might be a challenging situation in terms of school and some of the difficult situations that they may feel that they might be in terms of choosing a program of study, especially those that are non-traditional. And we hope to leave you with some strategies that you can take to your classroom or to your practice to help you in promoting growth mindset on your own when you're away from this webinar.
Thank you, Monique. So before we jump into those 3 objectives that Monique just introduced, I want to start off by asking you what your mindset is. So we are going to take a poll, and if we can move into that poll format, excellent. There's going to be 6 questions here. The first 3 questions here are about intelligence, and I see people are already jumping in. If you could do me a favor and read those statements that you see, and click whether you agree or disagree. This is going to help give us some understandings about mindset. I'll pause for just a moment as everyone reads those statements and clicks agree or disagree. And it's interesting to see how things change over time on these graphs. You have just a little bit more time if you haven't yet read those 3 statements and chosen whether you agree or disagree. This is going to really help set the scene for talking about mindset. There's about 6 more participants and then we'll move on. So I'll pause for just one more moment. And I'm really excited to see just the variety of participants we have from all over the country, both in high school, middle school, and community colleges and beyond. So welcome, everybody. If you're just joining us, we are answering these poll questions, reading the 3 statements to your left, and choosing whether we agree or disagree. All right. For the sake of time, I'm going to start moving on, so I'll pause for one more moment. I see we do have some new participants who are just coming on right now. We're going to ask you to jump right in and read those 3 statements to the left and decide whether you agree or disagree. Okay. The first statement, your intelligence is something very basic about you that you can't change very much. The second, you can learn new things, but you can't really change how intelligent you are. And lastly, no matter how intelligent you are, you can always change it significantly. For the sake of time, I am going to move us forward, so we'll get back to these slides in just a moment. But I'd like to move to a second set of questions, which are about your personality. So when we're talking about mindset, we're not just talking about intelligence, we're also talking about personality. So just like you have done before, if you can read these 3 statements about personality, and decide whether you agree or disagree. We'll review these in just a moment. And I see people are still just coming on now, so if you've just joined us, I'll try to orient you quickly. What we're doing is we're reading the 3 statements to the left about our personality, deciding whether we agree or disagree. And then in just a moment, I'm going to discuss this. If you've already answered those questions, feel free to, in the chat, share where you are coming from if you haven't done that yet. And I do see we have at least 3 new participants. For those of you who just joined us, my name's Michelle Brown, and I'll be co-presenting with Monique about mindset. And Monique is here with us as well, so we're happy to have you. Okay. Also, if there's any questions you have throughout this talk, feel free to add them to the chat section. And we'll be moving on shortly. I appreciate everyone sharing their votes. It's really exciting to see those bar graphs change over time. Okay. I'm going to pause just a bit longer for those people just joining us. These 3 statements, as well as the 3 ones before, are actually used to collect data about mindset. So this is some work I'll talk about in just a moment. It seems like the graph is not changing much anymore, so I'm going to now go to the first slide. So if we can go back to those first 3 set of questions. I'll leave that poll open in case people didn't have a chance to answer, but I'm also going to give us the results. So these questions came from Carol Dweck, and whether you agree or disagree can help align to what kind of mindset you have, which we're going to talk about today. So if you disagreed with the first 2 questions and agreed with that 3rd question, then that shows an inclination towards a growth mindset. Whereas if you agree with the first 2 and disagree with the 3rd, then that's more of an inclination towards a fixed mindset. There is not a black and white here. Everyone has a little bit of both, and I'll be saying that throughout the presentation. So it's not good or bad what your answer is. It's just good to know yourself, because the better you understand your own mindset, the better you can work with students and help them with their mindsets. So take a moment to look at that, those results in the slide that you see, and identify whether you have more of a growth or a fixed mindset when it comes to your intelligence. And I see more people have been adding on, which is excellent. I'm going to do the same thing now with a set of slides on personality. So if we can switch to that next set, these next 3 questions, remember, were about personality. Well, if you agree, let's do it this way. If you disagreed with the first and the last questions, questions 4 and 6, and you agreed with that 5th question, then that's more towards a growth mindset. Whereas agreeing, the opposite, is more towards a fixed mindset. You may find that you have a growth mindset in one area and a fixed mindset in another. And again, remember, we all have both of these mindsets. They just come up at different times. So keep in mind what mindsets you have a stronger inclination towards throughout this talk, because that'll be something that you'll want to consider as you start reflecting on how to change mindset and foster it with your students. I'm now going to move forward and talk about what mindset is. So what does it mean if you have a fixed or growth mindset? So at this point, I am going to change away from these polls. I hope everyone got a chance to participate, and move on to this slide. This slide is from Carol Dweck, who's a psychologist out of Stanford. You may have read her book or seen it. It's a very popular one called Mindset, The New Psychology of Success. And from her work, she identified 2 mindsets that people may hold. A fixed mindset aligns to this idea that intelligence is static. It's an innate ability and nothing can be done to change it. On the other hand, a growth mindset aligns to this idea that intelligence is developed and can improve with practice. Now, these are important concepts, and they can really affect equity. So I'm going to pass it over to Monique for a moment to just zoom out and show us the bigger picture of how mindset can be an important tool in a cycle or wheel of equity.
Oh, went too fast. So using a growth mindset in teaching is especially effective when dealing with students who may face inequities in the classroom. Of course, none of us would say or ever admit that there are inequities in the classroom, but we're going to take a look at this culture wheel, and this is our NAEP culture wheel, and we're going to take a look at examining how inequities may creep into your classroom and how fostering a growth mindset can help us to disrupt that cycle of inequity. So let's review the cycle. So culture shapes our beliefs and forms our biases about people and about groups of people, whether it's based on race, gender, age, religion, disabilities. These beliefs we hold within our culture, and those beliefs can lead to assumptions or about characteristics, about behaviors, and other social norms that we call stereotypes. These stereotypes can then lead to biases, and these biases can manifest themselves. We communicate these biases through what we call micro-messaging. And micro-messages are small, subtle, unconscious messages that are either sent or received, and they can be negative or positive and can accumulate over time. The accumulation of these micro messages over time can impact an individual's self-efficacy. Now, what is self-efficacy? Self-efficacy is the belief that one holds in their ability to be able to perform a certain task or be successful at a certain career or objective. Students with high self-efficacy have a greater motivation and can oftentimes have greater success, while those with low self-efficacy are less likely to persist and achieve. And we can see this manifest in choosing making career choices and choosing programs of study in college and beyond. So as educators, we can disrupt the cycle by challenging or changing micromessaging that are sent to students. This is the point at which we can make a change. We can help students develop the "I think I can" attitude rather than one that tells them that they can't. And one way of doing this is by fostering a growth mindset.
Yes, excellent.
So educating students to have a growth mindset can increase completion and retention rates of racial minorities and women who will enter the college setting, particularly in the STEM fields where we tend to see fewer numbers of students in those areas.
Yeah. Thank you, Monique. And like Monique said, we'll soon see as we dig into this work further just how powerful fostering a growth mindset is for the marginalized groups as well as for every student. So fostering a growth mindset works for everybody, but because of this cycle, it's particularly powerful for those marginalized groups. Excellent. I also was just noticing a comment by Desi in the chat. If you don't admit there are inequities in the classroom, you cannot address them. And that's a really important idea, which goes beyond the scope of our work today, but NAEP has some amazing material about this cultural theoretical framework that really digs into those areas of how do you become aware of the inequities and move on from there. I want to make a point before we dig in here. Unfortunately, just like most strategies that we come across through education, growth mindset is not magic. You cannot wave a growth mindset wand over your students and magically everyone starts doing really well in class and succeeding without any issues. Students who have a growth mindset are still going to struggle. At the heart of growth mindset is this idea that students who believe their intelligence can change are more likely to persist and seek help when struggling at a task. On the other hand, if a student fosters a fixed mindset, they're more likely to shut down and walk away. So growth mindset cannot fix how easy it is for a student to do well on a task, but it can change how they respond to that struggle. A student who struggles is still going to struggle, but if they have a growth mindset, they are going to try harder, they're going to seek help, they're going to persist rather than shut down and walk away. And this has been shown true regardless of gender, ethnicity, race, socioeconomic status, even ability, which is what makes it such a powerful tool. So at this point, we've kind of zoomed out, shown you a big picture of what fixed and growth mindsets are. You hopefully have an idea about where you stand on that scale, as well as how it ties into equity. I now want us to zoom really closely into the characteristics of fixed and growth mindset. So I'm going to start with fixed mindset. Remember, fixed mindset is this idea that intelligence is static. If I believe that I have this set amount of intelligence and I can't do anything to change it, then I am going to be focused on looking smart in my class. That focus on looking smart leads to a few behaviors that we see. For one, students are more likely to be afraid to make mistakes. Those are the students you may work with, whether it's in a counseling office or in a classroom, where they're less likely to share failures, they're afraid they're going to fail. So they may be less likely to sign up for a certain course. Maybe it might feel too challenging to them. They may be less likely to raise their hand in class because they don't want to look, they want to look smart. And by avoiding making mistakes, they're going to keep looking smart more. Another behavior that you would see with a student with a strong fixed mindset is that they're more likely to avoid challenges and give up. That's because it's easier to avoid that challenge than to face it because they might fail. And there's a focus on looking smart and avoiding failure. They ignore feedback. So whether you're a counselor giving feedback on classes and what they can do, or you're a teacher giving feedback on course material, they may be more likely to rip up that test and walk away or not pay attention to it when they read the comments that are given back to them, because that's an attack on their person, on their intelligence. They don't think they can change their abilities, so feedback doesn't help them. They feel threatened by others' success. So when they see people succeeding, they can compare themselves with others rather than being inspired by those people. At the heart of this, you can see this image that we'll use throughout the presentation. A student who has a strong fixed mindset becomes limited because all the behaviors that follow a fixed mindset really limit their ability to succeed. On the other hand, students who foster a growth mindset believe intelligence can be developed. They have a focus on learning. And as we will soon see, this creates behaviors that really help them reach their potential. They're comfortable making mistakes. It's not to say that they love failure or they love making mistakes, but they understand that making mistakes is part of that learning process, and that if they don't make a mistake, they'll never learn from it. They embrace challenges and persist. In fact, when Dweck was doing work, students who were challenged, some of them said like, yeah, I love a good challenge. So it's this really interesting response to when things get hard, which may be very different from students who experience a fixed mindset. They may be the ones that push themselves more. They choose a challenging course or topic. They learn from feedback. Since they think intelligence can be developed, when someone gives them feedback, they understand that those are strategies and helpful information to help them succeed. And lastly, they feel inspired by others' success because they believe they, too, can develop those same strategies. As you can see from our images here, a student with a growth mindset understands the brain is like a muscle. The more that we work it out, the better it can get. Now, we have an interesting question from Linda saying, don't they avoid challenges because they think they cannot do it rather than their proclivity to look smart? That is a really good question, and I think they are kind of intertwined there. The idea of focusing on looking smart aligns similarly with this idea that they don't think they can do it. If they think they can do it, they would maybe try it, and since they don't think they can do it, they're not going to try it, if that makes sense. I'll try to dig back into that later as we move on. And feel free to chime in, Monique or others on the call, responding to Linda's point. I do want to have you better understand where all of these behaviors came from. So I just gave you a list of key characteristics of fixed and growth mindset with a number of behaviors that you may see. This list comes from Carol Dweck. She and a colleague, Claudia Mueller, did a set of studies in 1998 working with 5th grade students, and from this work they got some really interesting results, which I'd just like to dig into so you can better understand how powerful mindset is, as well as where these behaviors can stem from. So what did Mueller and Dweck do? Well, they, like I said, they had 5th grade students, and they had these students do puzzles. As you can see in this image here, they had 4 different blocks, which the students had to arrange to match a given image. There were different types of puzzles. Some were kind of challenging and some were really challenging. Well, what they did was they separated these 5th grade students into different groups. One group of students received intelligence-based praise. After they completed a set of puzzles that were moderately challenging, they were told, "You did well, you must be smart." Now notice that praise kind of alludes to an innate sense of intelligence. It fosters that fixed mindset, so that's why we have that fixed mindset image there. A second group of students they worked with, they gave those students different praise after they completed that puzzle. They told them, "You did well, you worked hard." Notice the difference in that praise. In that praise, they praised the effort that was put in, not the innate ability. And that aligns more to a growth mindset. Now, there was a third group of students that they just said, "You did well." They didn't give intelligence or effort-based praise, and that was the control group. And like a good control group, those results were not significant. But there were some really interesting results that came from this work, which I'd like to dig into. Now, I said there was a set of studies. The first study that they did is they had the students do those puzzles and then gave them this feedback. And then what they did was they asked them if they wanted to choose an easier puzzle or a more challenging puzzle afterwards. Well, think about that characteristic. If I have a fixed mindset and I want to avoid making mistakes and I want to look smart at all costs, then I'm going to choose an easier puzzle. Whereas if I have a growth mindset, and remember these aren't necessarily the mindsets of students, but by fostering them, they kind of come out. If I have a growth mindset, I'm going to understand that it's okay to make mistakes and I want to challenge myself. Sure enough, students who received the intelligence-based praise were more likely to choose easier puzzles, while those who chose effort-based praise were more likely to choose harder puzzles. And that helps us understand those trends of avoiding challenges versus embracing them based on which mindset is fostered. I just want to reiterate throughout this presentation, nobody has just one mindset. So these are ways that we can bring out different mindsets, the way we interact with students. It doesn't necessarily mean they only have a fixed or growth mindset. One of the reasons I love talking about these studies is just how staggering the statistics are from each of them. So in this particular study, 92% of effort-praised students chose to try the harder problems, whereas only 33% of the students who were given that intelligence-based praise chose to try them. Another study that's really eye-opening is after they did a different study, with the same puzzles, 5th grade students, after they were given the moderately challenging puzzle and were given their praise, they were then given the option to look inside a folder that had the results of other students, or they could choose a folder that had strategies for success. Take a moment to think about it. Which folder would someone with an intelligence-based praise group, which one would they be more likely to open? Comparing themselves to others or getting new strategies? You maybe this doesn't surprise you. So the students who received intelligence-based praise were more likely to find out how everyone else did. Whereas students who received effort-based praise were much more interested in learning new strategies. And this pulls into this idea of students who are focused on looking smart at all costs are going to be more concerned with comparing success with others, whereas those who have more of a growth mindset are focusing on learning new strategies. Again, the results are staggering. 77% of effort-praised students chose to receive feedback instead of other students' scores, whereas only 14% of the intelligence-praised students wanted to get that feedback and new strategies. There's one last piece that came out of these Mueller-Dweck studies that I think is important to know, and especially as we are all educators and counselors and our main focus is on health, or even if you have other positions within education, your main focus is on helping students succeed and reach their potential. And I find this study to be particularly aligned to that. They were given, so I told you they were given a moderately hard challenge. Well, in a few of these studies, after they were given the moderately hard challenge, they were given this praise, and then they were given a really challenging puzzle. Again, they were given either intelligence or effort-based praise, and then the students had to do a third set of studies, a set of problems or puzzles that were just as difficult as the first ones, moderately challenging. Now, you would think if a student got 8 out of 10 puzzles correct in the first set of puzzles, they should still get 8 out of 10 puzzles correct on the last set of puzzles, which were the same difficulty, regardless of what happened in between. But we found that by giving different praise, those differences, the differences in behavior come out, which lead to differences in success. Students who were given intelligence-based praise, who were fostering a fixed mindset, actually performed worse on the third set of puzzles, even though they were just as hard as the first set. They performed worse than they had on the first set. Whereas students who received effort-based praise improved on the third puzzle when compared to the first. And as an educator, this really hits home with me. Effort-praised students improved their score on the final challenge by nearly 20%, whereas intelligence-praised students decreased their score by nearly 20%. Now, when you understand the thought processes and the behaviors behind fixed and growth mindset, this really starts to make sense. If I'm given, I'm going to go back. So if I'm giving you intelligence-based praise, telling you you must be smart, when you hit that really challenging puzzle, you think you should have that innate ability to do well. And when you struggle more than you had in the prior puzzle, it starts to tell you that you're not smart enough and that you can't do it. And that's where we see that avoiding challenges, giving up, and not trying as hard. When I have those feelings and I go to try that third set of puzzles, I'm not going to put in as much effort. I'm not going to persevere because I think I have a set amount of ability I can use. Therefore, I'm going to try even less harder than I had initially and do worse. Whereas in that middle set of puzzles, when things get challenging, if I know that effort and perseverance is what's going to give me more success, I'm going to strengthen those skills and those strategies. And when I get to that third set of puzzles, I'm going to try even harder. So just understanding the power that growth mindset has can really help you understand why we want to foster a growth mindset in our students. Now, I'm not going to ask us to reflect publicly. This is just something for you to think about privately right now. But I'd like you to take a moment and think, what kind of praise do you use most often in your practice? We're actually going to talk about praise further later on. And how might this affect your students' beliefs about their own intelligence? Do you see evidence of your students' mindsets based on their behaviors? So I already tried to explain some behaviors you might see with students. If you give a challenging activity, or if you're sitting with a student as a counselor and you're pushing them, if you notice they start to become defiant or have to go to the restroom or decide they have to leave, instead of deciding that they're just defiant students, consider other options. Maybe this is tapping into their mindset. And today we'll talk about some strategies and skills that will help you respond to those behaviors in a way that helps change them rather than just continue them. Okay, I have been talking for quite a while and not looking over at these questions here. So while you're reflecting, take a moment to reflect, and I will pause here for just a moment. It's nice to see that we're all engaged in responding and understanding some of these pieces here. So if a student, Alan has written, if a student has a growth mindset, will they react in that way even if they receive smart praise? That is a great question. I'm actually going to pause and talk about that when I get into the nuances. And this praise that I just spoke about with Dweck and Mueller was done in a very specific way, and I'll talk about this when we get into strategies. Fostering different praise is one way to foster a growth or a fixed mindset. I don't think that your praise alone is going to make a huge difference on the reactions, the whole wealth of a context, of an environment. So we're going to talk about fostering a growth mindset environment for students. If a student has a really strong growth mindset, would receiving fixed mindset praise significantly affect them? I haven't read any studies about that, but that would be an interesting study to conduct. Fixed mindset praise can change the student's mindset. We'll also get into growth mindset praise in just a moment. So moving on, I'd like us to interact again and take another poll. Now that you know the key characteristics and behaviors of fixed and growth mindsets, I'd like us to take a moment to just test our skills. So what I'm going to do here is we're going to switch into this poll where I'm going to read to you or show you a slide of each of these students, a scenario about each of these students, a profile, if you will. So for example, it's a little small to read, but the first scenario is about Dylan. What I'd like us to do is to read about Dylan, and then in the first box on the left, decide whether you think he has a fixed or a growth mindset. Now these are profiles. The purpose is to just become comfortable identifying the mindset a student has. Remember, no one has one or the other. They have a little bit of both. And this scenario is a little bit more simplified than the nuances and complexities you may find in your own students. Please make sure you're only responding to that top left box. The Derek scenario will be coming next in just a moment. I know it's a bit tricky here. So as you all read through, I'll just kind of stay quiet to help you read to yourself, and I'm happy to read through that in just a moment. Another interesting comment that's coming in is asking about whether or not this study, Fostering Fixed Mindset Praise Can Change Students' Mindset, addresses the ideas of self-efficacy. Again, at this point, you should just be focusing in on that top left box, asking what type of mindset is strongly aligned to Dylan. I'll go through these responses after we go through all scenarios. So Dylan graduated from high school. He's struggling as a math student in a local community college. A middle school teacher told him that he wasn't good at math and shouldn't go into a math-related career. That sounds a bit harsh, but in fact, there are examples of educators speaking like this about students. He struggled in math through middle and high school and now doesn't feel comfortable asking his teacher or peers for help. Lately, Dylan has been absent from his math classes, even though they are required for his degree in health and human services. And there's a pretty strong trend here that Dylan has a fixed mindset, which we'll dig into in a moment. Now if you want to read through scenario 2 and then decide whether you think he has a fixed or growth mindset. This one's about Derek. Derek likes middle school, but he also likes socializing with his friends. Many of his friends have been winning the Student of the Week award in science class, which is given to the student who gets the highest grade on the weekly quiz. Derek really wants to win the award too, so he started going to tutoring sessions with his science teacher. When the new award is announced, Derek gets excited and nervous. Unfortunately, his name isn't called, and Derek is disappointed. Although he congratulates his classmates who won the award, when he gets home, he looks over the quiz from the week and corrects his mistakes. The next day, he asks his science teacher if he can retake the quiz to see how he improves and makes a plan for how to study on the next quiz. And this one's a little tricky. So go ahead and think through that one. And I am going to keep this moving a bit fast just to keep us on pace with timing. I do want to make sure we get through the material in a way that helps you. So although some of you may still be reading through this and thinking through this, for the sake of time, I am going to push us forward in just a minute. The educator in me hates cutting off the learning experience. But for the sake of time, if you've only read halfway through, maybe you can still give some thoughts there. I am going to dig into the next one at this point. So scenario 3 is Candice. Candice has always loved school and has been an enthusiastic learner. Her parents supported her learning at home, and she worked hard and excelled in all subjects at school, especially math. It was common for Candice to score 100% on math tests. Her teacher and parents encouraged her with comments such as, "You are a math genius." Candice felt proud of her abilities and planned on becoming an engineer. By junior year of high school, Candice was in an advanced math class, and the work was becoming more difficult. When she received a 70 on the midterm, she was disappointed. When no one was looking, she tore up the exam, threw it in the trash. She decided that that wasn't going to happen again. On the next test, she scored a 90. Her secret was getting a stolen copy of the test the day before the exam. Hopefully that doesn't happen too often. So at this point, I really appreciate all the participation here. I'll pause for just a moment to think about Candice. And of course, these are scenarios in specific contexts. Feel free, or I encourage you, to adapt these student profiles to your own practices. So maybe think about a student coming in, if you're a counselor who's struggling in a course and isn't sure whether they should continue or not. If you're at the community college level or the college level, consider thinking of scenarios that move up a little bit. Again, for the sake of time, I am going to move this forward and go through results in just a minute. But I do want to point out some things about these. So we see that there's a strong inclination to think that Dylan had a fixed mindset, and in fact, that is true. The pieces there that help foster that is that the teacher, so remember, teachers can foster a fixed or a growth mindset. So Dylan had that fixed mindset fostered by a teacher who emphasized a lack of ability in math, reinforcing a fixed mindset. Linda just brought up a really important point. This ties into parenting as well. In fact, Dweck has done quite well with parents with her mindset book. So think about, as a parent, whether you tell your student that they're good in a subject or not good in a subject. Dylan did not seek help when he was struggling, and that's one of the key pieces you can look for, and he avoids math class, avoiding the obstacle or the challenge. Most people chose growth mindset for Derek, although a few chose fixed, and I can help you point out why. Derek initially was disappointed and frustrated with his success, which may tie into some of those initial thoughts of a fixed mindset. The key thing to look at is the behavior. Did Derek give up and not persevere, or did he get over that frustration and eventually persevere? And what we see here is that despite his initial responses, which were kind of the I can't response, eventually he did dig in and seek tutoring and correct mistakes and retake the quiz, and believes with effort he can succeed. And that's where we really want to look into those behaviors and understand everybody has a little bit of those both mindsets. If a student receives a bad score or doesn't think they can get into a class, at first they may show a little bit of that fixed mindset, but it's what they do that helps you really identify that. It's also important to realize that we want to work with all students regardless of their mindset. If a student has a fixed mindset, we're going to work hard to foster a growth mindset. It doesn't mean that we can't help that student. The last student is Candice, and again we have most participants aligning her with a fixed mindset, some aligning with a growth mindset. And she's an interesting case and an important one to bring up because she represents a high achieving student. You may commonly think of fixed mindset students as being those who are struggling and low achieving or not doing well. Well, fixed mindset affects all students, and there's a particular alignment to students who have never struggled. So whether it's a student who always struggles or struggles sometimes, or those who always succeed, they could also have a very strong fixed mindset where they think they are innately intelligent and there is nothing they need to do to study or work hard to do well. But they will hit a wall, whether it's in high school or college. Many of you may have seen this where a student for the first time doesn't do well and shuts down, avoids, steps away, cheats. So that's an important area to be aware of, that even students who achieve well could have a fixed mindset. Again, Linda pointing out how parents have been an important role in fostering that fixed mindset. So if you're a parent as well as an educator or counselor, consider this work applicable to your own family. She tore up the exam. Remember, that response to feedback piece is important. And she cheated on the exam. She's trying to look smart at all costs. All right. At this point, I do want to do another moment of reflection. Again, this is private. Feel free to think through this carefully and think through whether you're strongly aligned to a fixed or growth mindset. We all hold both mindsets with us. And hopefully you can think back to a time where you avoided a challenge because you were worried about looking smart or experienced a fixed mindset in other ways. And maybe you also can think of times where you've taken a risk to try something new or difficult, even though you knew you might fail, or experienced growth mindset thoughts or behaviors in other ways. Now, many of us have expressed an inclination towards a growth mindset, and I also feel like I have a strong growth mindset, but it's really important to recognize that we all also hold a little bit of fixed mindsets. So in reflecting on this myself, I recently took calculus for the first time. I don't know quite why I decided to do that. And I did quite poorly on an exam. And even though I was finalizing the toolkit, which this work is from, my instinct, the little voice in my head said, I can't do it. I don't belong here. I shouldn't be in this class. And luckily, I knew that that voice was a fixed mindset and that I should have a growth mindset. But that voice, that fixed mindset voice, may come up, especially when you experience failure in certain areas.
I have a similar story, Michelle. I, in high school, was a very high-achieving student in high school, and then went away to college. And what I recognized there is that when I went to this very prestigious college, that I quite wasn't ready for the challenge and the rigor of the college. And so I took calculus my first year as a freshman there, although I had been advised not to. I placed into it when I took my placement test, but my advisor said, you probably shouldn't. You probably should just take college algebra for reasons I don't understand. But nonetheless, I probably should have followed his advice. But I took calculus, and I made a 29, yes, out of 100 points, a 29 on the exam. And I had never failed an exam in all of my school days. So I left that class. I ran back to my room, called my mother, and said, I can't do this. College is not for me. And my mom just told me that, well, first of all, I can't bring you home, and so that you need to figure out what to do. And so I got a tutor and eventually passed the class and went on to take Calc 2 and Calc 3. But that just points out the fixed mindset that I had. I had done so well, was very high achieving throughout my school days, but when I hit an obstacle, I was ready to throw in the towel. And if not for my mother encouraging me to continue and get a tutor, I might not have been able to complete that class and, finish college even.
And I think that just brings home how important the messages we send to students can help really affect and foster their mindset. And I know we have a lot of counselors here with us today and educators, and you don't know the messages that these students have received at home or from prior teachers and counselors, but what you can do is help shift the messaging that may happen so that that kind of support allows us to succeed. Thank you for sharing. So I hope everyone at this moment has thought about some ways in which they've experienced both mindsets and understand your students are also experiencing these things. Some are experiencing far more fixed mindset experiences, others perhaps more growth mindset experiences. We want everyone to have a much stronger growth mindset because that's what leads students to reach their potential. All right, we're in good time here. We're going to now discuss benefits. And so benefits are, this is to help you understand just how powerful growth mindset can be for all students, and we'll particularly dive into those from marginalized groups. As we saw from the Mueller-Dweck studies, there are some really great short-term gains from fostering a growth mindset. We see students persist more when they encounter obstacles. Remember that study about students who have a growth mindset achieved more, while those who had a fixed mindset achieved less on those challenging puzzles. And that ties into that persistence. They're also more likely to use feedback to improve understanding. Think of the scenarios and the profiles where students ripped up feedback or threw it away. Think of your own students who, when you speak with them, you can tell that they're not really listening or they are really taking in those strategies and advice. There's also long-term gains, and I'll explain how this works in a little bit. But studies have shown that students who have a strong growth mindset are more likely to achieve more over a longer course of time. Also, they have greater enjoyment of school. And if you think back to the fixed mindset and growth mindset categories, if I'm constantly trying to avoid challenges and look smart in school, it's not a fun place to be. Whereas if I want to improve my learning and I know that it's okay to make mistakes and I seek out challenges, it's a much more enjoyable place to be. And we won't digress on the path that leads to, but just consider the paths that students would choose to take if they enjoyed the process of learning rather than avoiding that experience. Students from marginalized groups are more likely to persist and succeed if they have strong growth mindsets. Now, Monique walked you through that cycle of inequities, the culture wheel, and helped you understand how stereotypes and bias can affect, and micro-messages can affect a student's self-efficacy. If they are constantly feeling valued in an environment, then they may have a higher self-efficacy to achieve in a specific task, which leads to those behaviors of persistence. Whereas if the cultural stereotypes and the bias and the micro-messages creates a cycle where students are accumulating disadvantage and they are not feeling valued and they are not getting those messages that they can, which is that growth mindset message, then they are more likely to have a lower self-efficacy, which in turn is going to cause them to shut down, avoid challenges, give up the fixed mindset behaviors. So what we see, and I'll share with you 3 different aspects of this, is students from marginalized groups are particularly affected by having a strong growth mindset. So we can look at women in STEM fields, science, technology, engineering, and math. Studies show that students who have a strong growth mindset are more likely to persevere and follow STEM paths. Whereas students, also there's a study that shows, I think it's Dar Nimrod, has studied that females are more likely to have a fixed mindset in one of these studies. I've only seen that in one study, but it's there. Talking about math specifically, when students believe that math is an innate ability, which is a common stereotype, which micro-messages are out there to help perpetuate that myth, females perform worse on math exams, whereas if that myth is debunked or if those thoughts are not primed for when studying students, they do much better on math scores. And that's a study done by Dweck as well as Nix, I believe. So we can see that women who, if we can foster strong growth mindsets, women are more likely to persevere in these STEM fields, where if there's a fixed mindset, it's less likely. Another area where a marginalized group is significantly affected by a growth mindset or fixed mindset is looking at African American students and feedback. One of my favorite studies to talk about comes from Yeager. He studied students with by looking at WISE feedback. Now, WISE feedback is this set of responses that you would give where what he did was he had students create essays. It wasn't his own students, but in a class. And the teacher gave feedback, much like they would on any essay. He looked at the feedback before handing it back to the students. He put a note on one half of those essays that just said, "I'm giving you feedback." On a second group of those essays, he wrote a note that said, "I'm giving you this feedback because I have high expectations and I believe you can meet them." And that is what we call WISE feedback. I'll talk about that again later. Students who receive the WISE feedback were more likely to revise their work. And his study showed that African American students who received WISE feedback significantly revised their work. To the point where only 17% of African American students revised their work who did not receive WISE feedback, whereas 77% of African American students revised their work when they were given the WISE feedback. He also looked at students who had low trust of their teachers. He evaluated that through a questionnaire. He found that African American students who had low trust of their students showed stark differences in how they responded regarding their feedback. African American students who had low trust of their teachers who did not receive WISE feedback, none of them revised their work. Whereas African American students with low trust who received WISE feedback, 100% revised their work. And if you think about feedback and mindset, this really taps into how a student takes in that feedback. When you're giving a student feedback, whether it's in a counselor's office or in a classroom or in any environment, if they have a fixed mindset, that's an attack on their person. They don't think they can change their intelligence. Whereas if they have a growth mindset, they take that feedback and use it as a strategy to succeed. WISE feedback makes clear that the feedback they're giving these students is not an attack on their person, but is a tool to help them succeed. So by understanding that psychology behind mindset, you can really direct the way you interact with students in a way that significantly improves their results and allows them to reach their potential. Another study by Aronson looked at students with growth mindsets and found that particularly African American students showed greater academic achievement over a long course of time. I think they looked by the end of the semester, and reported enjoying class more if they fostered a growth mindset, whereas students who did not foster a growth mindset did not show those results. And it's important to just keep tying this back to that cycle of inequity where if we understand that students who are coming from marginalized backgrounds are more likely to need that bolstering of a growth mindset, or the ones who have a strong growth mindset are going to succeed and achieve more because it's focusing in on that self-efficacy and behavior piece. The last group I want to mention is students from different socioeconomic backgrounds. There was one study by Claro and Pinesco where they looked at the entire 10th grade population in Chile. And at the end of the year, these students complete an exam, a national exam. They asked the students the similar questions that you were asked at the beginning of this talk to help identify whether they had a growth mindset or fixed mindset. They also looked at their socioeconomic data. And they found a correlation here where students from low SES backgrounds who had a really high growth mindset actually outperformed students from high SES backgrounds who had a low growth mindset. Now, we're not saying that SES does not play a role in achievement. It definitely does. But what this is showing is that mindset, a strong growth mindset, can help equal that playing field. All right. I'd like to take a moment now before we move into strategies and ask you to just think about ways in which you could foster a growth mindset, particularly with students from marginalized groups, and understand that all the ways that you foster a growth mindset help all students, but it's particularly effective for those students from marginalized groups. I'm going to pause here for just a moment. I can see the chat is really doing great, which is nice to see. Linda just made a really nice connection. Marginalized students may have greater lack of self-efficacy because a lifetime of stereotyping by others, yes. Maybe that is why they respond so well. And I completely agree, Linda, especially when we start seeing that cycle of inequity starting with stereotypes and bias. And Monique, feel free to jump in here. But that's a key connection I'm happy to see you're making.
Trying to unmute my microphone. But yes, the concept that we haven't talked about much is stereotype threat, which Claude Steele kind of coined several years ago. But that's something that a lot of our students live under. The threat that the stereotype that they are, for example, an Asian student might live under the stereotype threat that they must be good in science and math, and should they perform less than they are thought to be able to perform, then they feel terrible about that because they've been living under their stereotype threat, and so that can happen with other marginalized groups as well. And so that's something we have to be careful about, fostering an environment where students are living under that threat.
And I also like to see Desi's point and Linda's response there, that we can't control how other educators and parents and counselors are interacting with these students and society at large to send these messages about what students can and can't do, and to foster that fixed mindset with students. But what we can do, and I think we have a group here that has a lot of power in how they affect students, just like Monique said, fostering that environment, creating an environment that fosters a growth mindset can really help make a difference.
And I think it was Desi who asked the question earlier. I'm making sure I have the right person, but someone asked the question about not recognizing that if you don't admit that there are inequities in the classroom, you can't address them. Well, that's where we can come in as educators as well. When we talk about implicit biases, if we look at implicit biases, we examine ourselves, look at the person in the mirror, and make sure that we're not creating inequities in our classroom by sending micro messages to students, whether it's race or gender, encouraging, for example, a young man to go into nursing versus only encouraging young ladies to go into nursing, for example, making sure that we're not sending those messages because of our implicit biases about nursing being a career for females, then we can affect some change in terms of outcomes in students with non-traditional careers and things like that, for example.
Yeah, excellent. And I agree with Jenny. Great point, Monique. Thank you for jumping in there. All right, so we're going to move on to strategies. So now you see just how important mindset is, how we want to foster a growth mindset for all students, particularly those who are experiencing that stereotyping and who may need that boost to change that cycle. So we're going to present with you now some strategies that have been shown effective to help foster a growth mindset in your practice. And although we're giving you very tangible strategies, the big picture is creating an environment where growth mindset is the message that gets sent. So I'd like to just briefly outline all the strategies we'll be going through, and then we'll dig in. Monique will take it away with brain plasticity. But these are some super strategies which really can help you foster a growth mindset. And if you do have the toolkit, these are really clearly marked out in the toolkit, which is helpful. Teaching about brain plasticity is one of the most effective ways to foster a growth mindset. Making it safe to make mistakes, which we'll talk about, using process-based praise, and that's a little different than effort-based praise. We'll talk about that in just a moment. Wise feedback, which you've heard about, breaking down goals for growth, encouraging slow learning, and using the power of yet. So right now we're going to go one by one through these strategies so that you have a big toolkit full of ways in which you can foster growth mindset in your practice.
Very good. So you may have heard that the brain is plastic. Well, no, that doesn't mean that it's actually plastic, but what it does refer to is that the brain has the ability to change throughout our lifetimes. It has the amazing ability to reorganize itself, form new connections between brain cell to brain cell. And so in addition to genetic factors, the environment that a person lives in, as well as actions that a person is involved in, play a significant role in plasticity. Plasticity occurs in the brain in a couple of ways. At the very beginning of life, when the immature brain is organizing itself, and so cells are moving around to shape the brain and form different functions in the brain. So that's one way plasticity occurs. In case of a brain injury, for example, in order to compensate for functions that might have been lost in an injury, for example, there have been studies that have shown that there have been animal studies that have shown that if an animal's eye was shut closed for some time, the area of the brain that controls the function of that animal's eye, and I'm thinking of a study using non-human primates, other functions kind of crept into that area that had been once used by that eye that was no longer being used by that eye. So another function was then being compensated for in that area. And so brain injury, we see plasticity occur in brain injuries. And then throughout adulthood, whenever something new is learned or memorized, brain cells adapt to that as well. So what you'll see here is a brain cell, a schematic of a brain cell, and we have billions of brain cells. The average adult human has billions of brain cells, and when we think about a brain cell, we look at and I don't have a cursor necessarily, but we have the cell body, which has many dendrites coming off of it, and one axon that comes off of it. The axon allows electrical impulses to be sent to other neurons, where they then touch and other dendrites on other cell bodies. These connections are what allows a stimulus to be propagated throughout the brain. As a person learns, more dendrites are created and more connections are formed. And the more connections that are formed allows a person to become, if in the example of learning or memory, more expert in a certain area. So a key way to help students foster a growth mindset is to teach them about how the brain works. We can teach them that the more they practice a certain skill, the more they study a certain subject, their brain cells will form more dendrites, make more connections, and they will become more expert, if you will, in that particular area. So, proving that the brain grows. There have been many studies that have shown that challenging environments, for example, assist the brain in growing. Dr. Elizabeth Gould, she was actually a friend of my graduate advisor, did some studies back in, several decades ago, that looked at monkeys look at the dendrites of the brain cells of monkeys who had been either in three scenarios. They lived in a cage where there were other monkeys and toys and where they had to forage for food, or they were in a cage that had fewer monkeys, fewer toys, but they still had to forage. And then there was a third set of monkeys who lived in a cage that was very small, no other monkeys, and it was bare. And the monkeys, as Dr. Gould looked at the dendrites, she examined their brain after some time and looked at the monkeys who had been in the more stimulating environment and found that those monkeys had more, 20 to 40% more dendritic connections than the monkeys that were alone. So that tells us that a stimulating and a challenging environment can help the brain grow more. There was another study, or there have been other studies, that compared brain scans of different groups of people and found that, again, individuals in more challenging environments have more development. So in this particular study, London taxi drivers were scanned using MRI, functional MRI scans, and they were found to have larger hippocampus, larger hippocampi, that's the plural for that word, than bus drivers. And this makes sense because taxi drivers need to know how to get around many more roads and areas in a particular city than a bus driver does, because the bus driver follows the same route over and over. So therefore they don't have as many, or they don't need to have as many neural networks or neural connection as do taxi drivers. And so this proved to be correct in that study. Another study showed that a research team looked at the brains of medical students who had an upcoming board exam and those who did not. They scanned the brains 3 months before their exam and right after their exam date. And what they found was that those who had studied for the exam and had been in that environment where they were actively studying had more connections than those who were not actively studying for an exam. So again, this points back to practicing leads to more neural connections. And if we are enforcing that in our students, we can hopefully perpetuate the idea that even if you have a fixed mindset, you can develop a growth mindset by practicing and studying and training your brain to grow more connections, and you can become more expert in a certain area. In this last study, there were, in teaching students about growth mindset, there was a study done by Blackwell in 2007 where math students were separated into two groups. The first group received lessons, explicit lessons about how the brain grows. So just as I was mentioning, if you talk to them and explain to them about plasticity and about the possibility of changing their mindset, in this particular study, the students were given explicit directions and told about how that could happen, explicit instructions about brain plasticity. In the second group, that group was only given lessons about general study skills, just how you should study, nothing that pointed to changing the mindset if necessary. So they were given these lessons weekly over the course of 8 weeks. And you can see from this graph that the students who received only 8 lessons about plasticity were able to change the trend. That would be the green blocks there. They were able to change the trend in improvement about as they took their math tests at that second point in time. Those who were just given the study skills explanation and instructions 8 weeks prior didn't show any or actually decreased in their performance. So again, this points to how we as educators can teach about brain plasticity and encourage our children to improve in subjects that they may not be as skilled in, but they can improve their skills in these areas.
And Linda asks a really great question. Sorry to jump in here. If the connections persisted after those exams with the German medical studies, I believe it's mentioned in the study, but I wonder, Monique, if you can talk about whether the brain continues to, if those dendritic growth in general in brains continue to grow, or if they atrophy, if you will.
So yes, atrophy is the right word actually. If the learning continues, if the practice continues, then the connections persist. If they don't, then you lose them. If you don't use them, you lose them. And so many studies, including this one, showed that that if you continue to work hard at keeping that those connections intact, then they will persist.
Thank you.
And so another strategy is creating an environment that is safe for mistakes. So Dr. Rita Smilkine, in her theory of natural learning, showed that if students are allowed a space where they can make mistakes, allowed a space where the natural learning process can occur, that students will go from very novice interaction and novice learning to mastering a subject or skill if allowed to. She identified 6 stages in the learning process, and that's the motivation stage. It begins with the motivation stage. It goes on to the beginning practice where lots of mistakes occur, and you see that in babies, for example. When babies are learning to walk, they make lots of mistakes. They fall down, but they get up and they continue going. So that's that beginning practice stage. The advanced practice stage, where a solid foundation for learning occurs. If you have a student that's, for example, my son, when he was taking up violin, oh my God, it was brutal at times, but he got better over time, and that advanced practice stage allowed him to get better and to move forward into that skillfulness stage. And so as he became more skillful at his craft, he was able to refine it and was able to master it in the long run. So, but along the way, you know, he had very good teachers and a very good orchestra teacher, and she was very encouraging and made sure that he had an opportunity, and as were his parents, able to allow for a safe place in his room with the door closed to make mistakes, but he was able to master that skill. So with time and with some effort, young people can hone their skills, and the brain grows while this is happening as well. So again, as those connections are being made and those skills are being honed, if we were to look at dendritic processes at that point, we'd see that there was a more enriched field of dendrites in the brain. So we have to be able to allow young people a safe place to make mistakes.
Thank you. Yeah, and just to chime in here on that, students with a fixed mindset, they stop at that beginning practice piece, because that's where you hit all those mistakes and failures, and that's where they avoid challenges, say I can't do that, and don't follow that career path or don't follow those courses. And so creating an environment where students understand that mistake making is a normal part of the process can help keep them in those phases and help keep them in that career path. Thinking about women in STEM fields, if they understand that making mistakes is the accepted and important process towards mastery, then they're more likely to stay in those fields. And as an educator, I often reflect back to my teaching and ways in which I made it safe or unsafe to make mistakes. For example, if a student gets an answer wrong or says something incorrect, do you just move on to another student, or do you say to that student, thank you for taking a risk in this class? The little ways that you can make it a room where mistake making is accepted is really important. Modeling mistake making, so saying ways in which you've made a mistake yourself, and becoming vulnerable with your students, whether it's a counselor or a teacher, can help them understand it's okay to make mistakes and fail. One other way in which I often think back is when I first started teaching, for a while actually, I would post the 100% work on the board in the room, the excellent examples, rather than thinking about the ways in which students were improving and growing. So think about the work that you put up, whether it's in your classroom or the little pieces in your room that foster an environment. Does it only celebrate success, or does it celebrate when we make mistakes and learn from them? So say it's a mistake on a paper, but then the correction the student made, ways in which we show growth. Thank you. I'm going to move forward with some other steps and strategies. This one ties back into the work we talked about with Dweck and Mueller and the effort-based praise, but I want to be careful to show a nuance here. The praise that we really recommend you give to students is more about process-based praise. Instead of telling students, fostering that intelligence-based praise, saying, wow, you aced the quiz without a sweat, you did so well, you must be smart, you can praise them in a way where you highlight the strategies that they've used that have led them to that success. So for example, you did a good job, or you did well because you prepared and studied hard for your test. Look at how much you've improved. Look at how you approached those questions. You annotated, you underlined, you thought carefully. By praising the process, you're giving students messages that let them know what strategies they are doing that's helping them succeed, and then they can internalize those strategies and use them more. In thinking about being a counselor, writing those essays and applying to those college applications are overwhelming for many students. And so thinking about it, or if you're in the community college as a counselor, thinking about the struggles those students face as they finally hit a really challenging course, if they've been one of those high achievers all the way through, helping students understand the things that they are doing, the specific strategies they're doing that are helping them succeed, and then highlighting the things that aren't going well. So you seem to be struggling here. Why don't we talk about that? Or let's sit down and find some other strategies. Being really specific in your praise can really help foster a growth mindset. It is more work. You do have to say more and do more, but think about the results. Think about the benefits we've seen. It definitely makes a difference. We talked about wise feedback, but I definitely want to highlight it again here. Hopefully at this point you can see just how powerful providing a strong feedback to a student that lets them know that you have high standards and you believe they can reach them. Sometimes this gets misconstrued, not just but the feedback, the praise as well. We are never saying to lower your expectations to foster a growth mindset. In fact, if you think about it, lowering expectations and making work that's easier so that students feel successful in a sense, can send a micro message to students that you don't think they can do as well. And so having high expectations, but then providing strategies and support for students to reach those expectations is a much more powerful way to foster a growth mindset. Wise feedback is a key way to do that. It's okay to make mistakes. It's okay to have failure as long as students learn from that. And a key way they can learn is from feedback that you give them. There's other strategies that we talk about to help foster a growth mindset. One piece is goals for growth. And what that means there is instead of giving a student a really huge, overwhelming project without points in between to reflect and to think about what they're doing well and where they need to improve, students may feel overwhelmed and shut down and walk away much more quickly. Whereas if you take a big assignment, whether it's the college application or a project in science class or whatever class you're teaching, one of those big assignments, and break them down into smaller pieces. And after each smaller piece, students set a goal for that growth, and then you reflect on that goal with them, and you tell them what's going well and where they need to improve, give them some wise feedback, give them some process-based praise. Then they will try again in the next step. And as they use those strategies, they should be experiencing more success, which then helps foster a stronger growth mindset. Another one, which is especially tricky for those of you who are in any bureaucratic setting where you can't control the pace of your course, is slow learning. But it's something that wherever you can control is where you want to foster this. So slow learning is this idea that students are going to master concepts at different paces, and to allow students to work at their own pace as much as you can is important. So considering letting students revise their work after getting feedback, retaking a test or a quiz, giving them options to work on and improve rather than expecting them to master it right away and to master it right away within a set amount of time. I know in math growing up I always did those speed trial worksheets. That is not helpful to foster a growth mindset. So just thinking about that aspect of your work. And lastly, one of the favorite and small ways that you can make a huge difference is the power of yet. You may hear students saying, I can't take that class, I can't do this work. Add the word yet. And what that does is makes this idea that it's not about mastery right now, it's about mastery over time. It's about perseverance and trying new strategies, and eventually you will get there. These are just other strategies that you could consider to how to foster a growth mindset in your classroom. So we're going to do one last activity before we start to wrap up our work here. I really want you to take all these strategies that we've worked on and see if we can help you apply them to your own environments. I realize some people are not a teacher or a counselor, educator counselor, but hopefully you can find a scenario that fits with you. So what we're going to do now is we're going to get into chat, which I've been so happy to see an active chat here. But I'm going to switch to a module here where I'm going to ask you to read some scenarios. I'll be putting them up here in the slides. And I'm going to ask you to think about the changes you would make to foster a growth mindset. And think about the strategies. Perhaps, hopefully, there's strategies we've talked about today, or maybe you have other ways that you would foster a growth mindset. So I'm hoping this is not too small for you to read, but you can choose to do both, or if you want to just focus in on the educator or counselor scenario, here are situations where a teacher or an interaction is not fostering a growth mindset well. Go ahead and read those scenarios and think about ways that you would foster a growth mindset. What would you do differently? And write those responses into the correct column here. So the educator response is about a teacher, Mr. Matter, who is proud of his advanced math students and wants to make sure they stay challenged. When he sees a student doesn't finish in time, he gives her speed trial problems to practice at home. Think about that student not finishing in time. What kind of messages is she perhaps sending to herself, and what could that teacher do differently to really foster a growth mindset? In the counselor scenario, a student who's previously succeeded in math without much effort, that one of those high-achieving students wants to switch out of an AP class because of a low grade on an early exam. The counselor says, "Don't worry, you're so smart, it's going to be easy." We have Monique moderating the educator column, and Megan is helping us with counselors. Of course, you're welcome to chime into either chat box. So Jim writes that, I'm going to talk about the educators while we move on, that Mr. Matter might want to explain to Angela that her learning is important to him, and he is certain she can learn the material. So that confidence, that almost like a wise feedback thing here. So talking about that with time and with effort, she can eventually succeed, maybe offering her new strategies or understanding where she is having problems and giving those strategies would help. And again, Linda's honing in on the fact that timing is not the issue. Yeah, the timed learning is a huge deficit to helping students master problems. Let Angela finish it later at home and continue to work on increasingly complex problems. I completely agree. Just getting rid of that timed problem format is important. I love how Desi thinks about talking with Angela and understanding where she is struggling, reinforcing faith in the student. Those are all excellent comments. In terms of the counselor feedback, Elizabeth writes, exploring why students want to leave the class, exploring their goals, and deciding if the AP Math would help, making a plan to help the student grow. And that's an important part of growth mindset, is giving students strategies and tools to help them grow is really important. I love what Catherine writes. You haven't learned the material yet. Give yourself time. With more effort, you will be successful. You are so smart. Rather than say you are so smart, talk about how the student's effort is important and how they can structure their study. What I'm really happy to see from the participants so far is this idea, this focus on strategies rather than just general praise, and understanding what supports the student might need. I love Linda's thought about finding a time when the student experienced something that did not come easy. So just like we've asked you to reflect on times in which you've overcome a challenge that was hard, tapping into that memory for students may also be helpful. And to ask, have the student talk to the teacher to see if they can get some tutoring. Again, yes, like seeking alternative strategies is a really powerful way to help promote a growth mindset. I'll leave this open for just a moment longer. I realize we're about at the end of our presentation here, and I do want to keep us close to our timing. So I'm going to ask you to, I know this is a rich area and people are typing, so what I'm actually going to do is just move on in the slide to the left as you finish up those thoughts and responses. But for the sake of time, I am going to move forward in the corner here. And I'm going to talk about one last important thing, and once we see those chats die down, we will move back into the big presenter mode here. I mentioned earlier when talking about how powerful Dweck and Mueller's studies were and how powerful those results were, why I would talk about why they worked so well. And one really important piece that comes from these studies that we've learned is this understanding that unlike teaching, less is more when you're trying to foster a growth mindset. So one thing I just want to dig into, and if we can finish up those thoughts, but I really appreciate all of the suggestions you are offering here. When you leave this webinar, I hope that you go back to your practice, whether it's a counselor, teacher, or other environments, and use some of these strategies. But please be mindful of one thing here, and that is that fostering a growth mindset is not the same as giving someone information. You don't want to be explicit and push it too hard, or else students will push away. Many counselors may be familiar with this interaction. So I'm going to ask that we move back into presenter mode here, just to leave you with this one last big piece here. That is the idea that in order to foster a growth mindset successfully with your students, it's all about planting the seed. So what you want to do is give them small ways where the environment that they're in fosters a growth mindset. It's not an explicit thing where you're sitting down with a student and telling them they need a growth mindset or telling them that they have to do these things to foster a growth mindset. You're creating an environment that fosters a growth mindset that helps students start to change the way they think. And once a student slowly starts to internalize a growth mindset, they are going to increase some of those growth mindset behaviors. For example, they might try a little bit harder once you've given that effort-based praise with process, with specific strategies, once you've given them that wise feedback, once you've given them that safe for mistakes environment. And once they try a little bit more, they should see increased success. And that confirms that that behavior was successful, and then their growth mindset grows. It's all about planting the seed. The successes that we've seen in these studies, all the studies we've mentioned, worked because they were very careful to do just a little bit to plant that seed, and then it cycled back through themselves. We've seen studies that show that over time a student's growth mindset leads to achievement. It's a long-term effect, and that's because of this recursive cycle that goes on within a student. This article by Yeager and Walton really helps explicitly talk about just how nuanced fostering a growth mindset is, and the importance that the less is more is a successful strategy. So to review, we have discussed quite a handful of strategies that I really hope you bring back into your practice and have a growth mindset about as you test them out, and hopefully you'll see results with your students. And I'm not going to go into this now, but in the toolkit there's some next steps that you can consider, the small ways that you can make a difference with your practice, whether it's thinking about how you talk with students and we're making a script to help you push away from that fixed mindset. I know saying something like, this is going to be easy, is something I used to always say, even though that fostered a fixed mindset. Writing a letter to students, letting them, fostering some of that growth mindset piece in there, taking a big project you have and breaking it down, or maybe there's another way you can change your practice. We are running late on time, but I want to just highlight there's some key steps and some cycles that this is in your handout that you see that you can download in that Documents to Download box, #1 handout. Nate, this is in there. Some key steps to just review: recognizing your own mindset, which I think we've all done, and considering how your mindset may affect the behaviors and responses of your students, becoming aware of the ways in which you may foster a fixed mindset through micro messages, including praising, environment, etc., and purposefully disrupting that cycle of fostering a fixed mindset by changing aspects of your practice, the words that you say, the values that you celebrate, how you provide feedback, and continuing to cycle through there. I want to leave you, I apologize for the numbering here, with some key strategies. Is that people typically have a growth and a fixed mindset, which may surface. Their mindsets can change, especially when they are in environments that foster a growth mindset, and that science shows that the brain changes and grows over time. Fostering a growth mindset can help every student reach their potential. A growth mindset is particularly powerful for marginalized students and those in STEM fields. All of this work that we spoke with you today about and more are in the NAEP Educator Toolkit. So if you haven't yet gotten one, we strongly recommend you order one. That whole piece about growth mindset and brain plasticity, that whole piece about brain plasticity is actually written out in a really great way that you could just implement right with your students. So consider if this work has been meaningful to you and you'd like to learn more and see some specific activities and lessons that you can implement with your students or with your colleagues. There are lesson plans and professional learning community guides for all of this in the toolkit. I'm going to let I'll pause for a moment and we'll take a moment for questions and comments, but I'd really just like to thank you all for participating with us. Your comments and chats have been so helpful. So if there's any questions, this would be a great time to share.
So Michelle and Monique, thank you so much for offering your expertise to us today. Again, for those of you who have questions, please feel free to type those in the box and we'll address them. As people are typing their questions, I want to kind of close us out here just a little bit. Again, my name is Megan Pollack, and I'm the Director of Professional Development for the National Alliance for Partnerships and Equity. And as an organization, we do lots of great things. So our primary focus is delivering services to schools and institutions across the country with the goal of increasing access, equity, and diversity in education. And we're really focused on helping educators and the institutions where they work to realize the potential of every student. And so we do that through our professional development, through our research and evaluation, through the technical assistance that we provide to schools as they're challenged to meet some of the accountability measures that they have, as well as being very engaged with public policy and advocacy in both the federal and state levels. So if you're looking to know more about what we do, we have a suite of professional development services. We do customized webinars, not too different than the one that you have here. We have our National Summit for Educational Equity that's every April. We've just released our registration, well, we're about to release our registration, and the call for proposals is out. So if you have work that you're doing that you'd like to share with the country, please submit it, and we hope to see you in Washington, D.C. in April. We have a variety of turnkey implementation toolkits like this Realizing Potential with Mindset toolkit that's been presented to you today. And a couple of the things that we presented today are also available as infographic wall art. So they make great posters to put into your classroom. And additional services, and you'll find this key information available in the download number 2. So in the very center of the panel here, it's labeled 2 NAEP services and resources. So we offer professional development that's both in person, in hand, and online. And so if you have any questions, please reach out to me. I'd be happy to help you. We've got the 3 toolkits that are currently available: Explore STEM Careers, Explore Non-Traditional Careers, and the Realizing Potential with Mindset that came out just a couple of months ago. And we'll be releasing 3 more toolkits in the months to come. One on project-based learning, really focusing on ensuring equity in every way that project-based learning happens in the school systems. And then a lot of you have made connections to this work to self-efficacy, and the answer is yes. This is a great way to build student self-efficacy as it relates to the framework that we presented to you earlier. And we will have additional toolkit released in early 2017 that's focused specifically on self-efficacy. And so not only do we have these toolkits are the workbooks for our professional development. So if you'd like for us to come in and work with you and your school district, we can inform all of your educators, practice, and help them realize better ways to meet student potential. With this, I can turn it back over to Freda. And
hello. Yes, I'm here. Yes, someone has asked, will this webinar be available? And it is recorded and will be archived on the NAEP site. It takes a few days, so Greg Nagy will be sending out information about that with the link. I'd just like to say thank you to everyone who participated today. And let's see, there we go. In particular, our 3 presenters, Michelle, Monique, and Megan. I learned a lot, and I just think there are a lot of things I can use just in my daily life besides my professional practice. We'd like for you to, thanks for participating, and we're going to move now so that you can actually ask Greg to send out the survey. We appreciate your input because it makes a difference on what we conduct, the topics, and also on how we can conduct the webinars. So thank you, and hope you have a good rest of the day.
Hello everyone, this is Greg. I'm sending the survey now. Looks like maybe Freda clicked on it. It should open for everyone in a separate tab on your browser. If it hasn't, you can click on where it says Webinar Evaluation Survey and click Browse To. And if you don't get that, I will also be emailing it here to you shortly for you to do it on your own time if you don't have time now. So thank you, everyone, and that is the end of our webinar.